Hello again, friends. It's wonderful to be back for another Sunday school lesson together. This week's topic actually comes from you. You asked a question, and I think it is the most interesting of topics to tackle and explore as we go through our time together here today. Today, we are excitedly going to take a look at dinosaurs. Now, okay, so maybe as much as I would like to believe that there is a real live Filosaurus stomping around through my home, let's try that again. Today, we are going to discuss dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are one of the most interesting topics around. I know ever since I've been a kid, I've been fascinated with the stories of dinosaurs. They just look so cool. The stories about them are so cool. I love the Jurassic Park movies. I just think dinosaurs are one of the most fascinating topics around. But as we've come to our Sunday school class all through our lives, we open up the book of Genesis and we hear about the creation of the world, and we see that the world is created in 6 days and God rests on the seventh. And as we think about that, we wonder, well, where did the dinosaurs fit into all of that? Were they created and they died and they became fossils all in the matter of like a day before people came around? What do we make sense of a 7-day creation and dinosaurs that we believe lived millions and millions of years ago? Do those conflict? Do they have to fight? What do we do? What do we do with dinosaurs? They're super cool, but do we have to just, as Christians, throw them out the window and get rid of them? Today, I'm going to talk about why I do not believe that we need to do that. I think some of the conclusions that people have drawn in our modern context about the creation story in 7 literal days, I don't think the initial writers ever intended us to do that. And I think that sometimes when we get fixated on 7 literal days, we wind up actually missing out on the bigger message that the author of Genesis is trying to share with us. I don't know if you have a favorite dinosaur, but for me, I believe that the unquestionably greatest dinosaur of all time is without a doubt the Stegosaurus. I mean, what dinosaur could be better than the Stegosaurus? It's still enormous, like a dinosaur, but in addition to being huge, like most other dinosaurs, it also has these massive armored plates that make it just impenetrable all along its back, and it has these just crazy spikes on its tail. So it's a friendly dinosaur, but it's basically a tank that you don't want to mess with. I just think the Stegosaurus is the coolest dinosaur of all. And one of my biggest pet peeves was, as a kid, I was given this Jurassic Park toy of a Stegosaurus because it was my favorite dinosaur, and they just assumed that it would get eaten by the T-Rex. So it had this like meat chunk that would, for fun, pull out. And I just thought that was the most ridiculous thing because nothing could ever beat a Stegosaurus. I don't know what your favorite dinosaur is. It should probably be a Stegosaurus, but again, going back to my love of dinosaurs, it doesn't have to be something that we lose as a Christian people. They're fascinating pieces of history and the past that I think we can enjoy and celebrate and study and learn from without feeling like our belief in the existence of dinosaurs is fighting with our faith that we have as Christians. In fact, I believe that looking at a world that is old enough to have dinosaurs millions of years ago ultimately brings us to even more awe and amazement at the providential power of God, who can bring such marvelous things about even over millions and millions and millions of years. To better understand and appreciate why we don't have to read the 7 days of creation in a literal sense, we do well to look at the story of another ancient people. If we talk for a moment about the Enuma Elish, the creation story of the Babylonians, ultimately that will help us to understand what is being said in our own Genesis 1 creation account. In the Enuma Elish, the creation story of the Babylonians, a great enemy of God's people, you have all sorts of different gods in the beginning, and you have 2 big gods from whom all the other gods are made. You have Tiamat, who is the biggest, most powerful, fearsome god of them all. She's the goddess of salt water. And if you think about how much salt water covers the earth, there's pretty much more salt water than just about anything else on the planet. And so the goddess of salt water is going to be incredibly strong. And then she is with Apsu, who is the god of fresh water, who, fresh water, there's still a good bit of it, but there's far less fresh water than there is salt water. So Tiamat is just this most powerful goddess in all of creation for the Babylonians. She and Apsu have a bunch of children. They mingle their waters together, and out come all these other gods and children. And those gods have other children, and then all of a sudden there's all these different gods running around the earth for the Babylonians. Well, Tiamat and Apsu are kind of the ones who reign and rule over everything, but some of the other gods are causing some trouble, and ultimately they get at odds with each other. And so Tiamat is about to go out to battle with this other god named Marduk, who is sort of a warrior god. He's big and he's powerful, and all the others fear him, but still Tiamat is the biggest, baddest one of them all. And so Marduk and Tiamat face off, and Marduk can't beat Tiamat on his own, and so he plays a trick. She opens her mouth up, and she's about to devour him because she's basically this fearsome beast. And as she opens her mouth up, he sends these spirits of wind into her that blow her up like a giant balloon. And blown up like a giant balloon, she can't move. And so he shoots her with an arrow, and he kills her, and then he takes her big, blown up like a balloon body, and he cuts it in half. And the top half he throws up, and that becomes the heavens or the sky, and the bottom half he puts down, and that becomes kind of the land and the earth. And so you have this incredibly violent creation of the world. Well, you have the world now, but you don't have people. So the gods, Marduk especially, who's now sort of the ruler of all the gods, he wants to have people, because people can be servants, they can be slaves of the gods. And so what they do is they take Kingu, who is an ally of Tiamat, and they take him and they wring him out. They kill him, and as his blood drips down onto the earth, from his blood, the blood of his murder, human beings are created. And so in the Babylonian creation account, you have this incredibly violent creation of the world. It's murder that brings about the earth, and it's murder that brings about people, and people are only created so that they can be servants and slaves of the gods. So you may be asking at this point, what do I care about the Babylonian creation account? What does that possibly have to do with the Genesis story? But what we need to remember is that the Babylonians were a big part of Israel's history. And in the 600s and 587-ish, we have this thing called the Babylonian captivity. And during that time, Babylon just conquered pretty much the whole known world, and the Jews were a part of that. And Babylon, when they conquered, they didn't respect anybody, and one of the ways that they kept other nations under their thumb to keep them from rising up was they essentially kidnapped a whole bunch of the prominent people from the nations that they conquered, and they took them back with them to Babylon. That way, if you wanted to rise up, you knew that your loved ones were, essentially servants and enslaved in the heart of enemy's territory. So you don't want to rise up, because that could mean harm would come to the people that you loved who had been taken away. One of the things that came about with this, when you had all of these prominent Jews displaced from Israel and taken to Babylon, to a foreign land, you have this crisis that emerges among the Jewish people, because they had worshipped the God of Israel. And even in many of their minds at the time, the God of Israel was just one of many gods in the world. And the God of Israel had power when you were within Israel's borders and boundaries. And so how do you worship your God in a distant land where he doesn't really have any power? All of a sudden there's this helplessness and this depression and this crisis throughout the whole Israel, as they wonder, how do we worship our God in a foreign land? If he has no power here, then what does our worshiping do? That's where our creation account comes in. If you didn't realize it, our Bible actually has two creation stories. There's the story in the first chapter and very beginning of chapter 2, where God creates the whole world in 7 days, and then you have the Adam and Eve account as actually a second creation story. We believe that the Adam and Eve account is actually the older creation story, even though it's the one that reads second. But the second creation account, which is Genesis 1, which talks about the creation of the whole world in 7 days, we believe that that was actually written around the time that many of the Hebrews were taken hostage in Babylon. And when they're asking that question, and when their faith is in crisis, and when they're wondering, how do we worship God in a distant land, all of a sudden you get this new creation account that says, you know what? The God of Israel is not just the God of some geographic bordered land. The God of Israel is actually, whether people realize it or not, the God of the entire world. And so you get this creation account that says you can worship God in a distant land because he's the God that made your land and every land throughout the world. He is the God and the creator of everything. And one of the reasons that we think that this creation account is speaking hope to a people in exile, to a people wondering how they can worship their God, is because there's such a contrast between the way that our creation account speaks and the way that the Babylonian, the Enuma Elish creation account, talks about the creation of the world. In the very beginning, we see a nod to Tiamat, even in our own creation account. Remember that she is the goddess of salt water, of all those chaotic waters in the world. And at the beginning, we see the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. And so one of the messages that's right at the beginning of our creation story is that the God of Israel is dominant. He is over. He is more powerful than even Tiamat, the biggest goddess of the Babylonians. And so we have this assertion of our God over the gods of our captors right in the beginning of this creation account. And then as it goes on, we see that there's a beautiful contrast in the way that our God does things as opposed to the way that the Babylonian gods do things. The world for the Babylonians was created out of violence. You trick, you act deceitfully in battle, you blow someone up, and then you cut them in half, and from their top half and bottom half you create the world. That's incredibly violent and terrifying. How does God create the world? He decides that it's good and proper to have things in it, and he gently and lovingly and kindly speaks them into existence. There's such a power in just being able to speak something. He doesn't need to pick up a sword to get what he wants. He just speaks and things come to be. But also there's a gentleness and a kindness and a compassion and a beauty to the way that God creates. And then when it comes to the creation of human beings, God, again, doesn't create us out of violence. He speaks. And what he decides about human beings isn't that I'm going to create them so they can be my servants and pamper me day and night. God says I'm going to create human beings so that they can be in my image, in my likeness, and they can have rule over the earth as well. Not to say that we can do anything we want with the planet. Ultimately, the world and everything in it belongs to God. But rather than being servants, he creates us in power and with opportunity. It's wonderful. So, as we think about our creation account against the Babylonian creation account, we realize that the days are to give some explanation to how the world was created. I believe a bigger intended point of the 6 days of creation and the 7th of resting is to give a model for how we ought to live. I believe that they show that our God is a God of order. It's not a chaotic battle out of which creation comes, but God plans things out, and meticulously and beautifully and in good order, he brings creation into existence. But I don't think that we necessarily have to say that creation account is telling us that the world is only several thousand years old and it was created in literal 24-hour days. It doesn't seem that that was the actual point of it. So do I believe in dinosaurs? Yes, I absolutely believe in dinosaurs. Do I believe that the world could well be millions and millions of years old? Yes, I absolutely believe that. And honestly, I think that that allows us to look at God in all the more beautiful ways, because God doesn't just see a problem and snap his fingers and create a quick solution. But if we think of the world as millions of years old and as even evolution as a possibility, well, if there's intelligence behind evolution, then God began his creation billions and billions of years ago. And it's kind of like when you see someone who they have that whole setup through their whole house, and the dominoes knock over something that lights a match, that burns through a rope, that swings a ball, that, knocks over a pillar, that knocks another ball off of a counter, and eventually it all comes together into a cup. If you think of the intelligence behind evolution, God could have had this plan that was to last millions and millions of years, and everything came together so perfectly throughout history that all of a sudden everything has fallen together in this most marvelously orchestrated work that's ever been or will ever be in us here today. So enjoy the dinosaurs. They are super cool. Don't feel that you have a crisis of faith if you believe in dinosaurs or in evolution, but just think of how much more marvelous God is to have an even longer plan and a longer rule and reign than we ever realized. I hope that you have some fun with this, and I hope that you've appreciated some of this explanation, and if you have any other questions, please let me know, because we have a deep and a rich faith, and sometimes it forces us to think and to wrestle with things, but ultimately, I think as we dig deeper, we tend to find deeper and more beautiful truths. We tend not to find things that scare us. God is good, and He's with us, and I can't wait to see you guys again and to talk about some more wonderful aspects of this faith that we share. God bless.